Terror in Tandem's Octerrorfest. All month long, we will be celebrating the horrifying delights of the spookiest month, October. Prepare yourself for episodes that frighten and delighten your spine, and we will chill you to the bone. You can find us online at terrorintandem.com and on Instagram at terrorintandem. Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome to the spookiest of months.
Welcome
Spooktober.
to Octerrorfest.
Yeah.
With your favorite team, Terror in Tandem.
Hello.
Hi.
TNT? TNT, right?
TNT.
TNT.
Oi.
Yeah.
Oi.
Oh,
Oi.
this is great. I love October for so many reasons. It's a break from the humidity. You get the changing leaves.
Mhm.
And
Apples. Apparently, you love apple cider. That was like a new reveal.
Yeah, I do. No, I love apple cider. I love hard cider. It's like my favorite boozy drink. And I just dig the whole vibe of October. And like everybody's into Halloween. Everybody gets really into it, at least in America. And we are in the Northeast, so
A special shout out to one of our neighborhoods of our property has this incredible haunted house
right.
situation.
We drove by it yesterday.
It is
Intense. Really intense.
Well, it's not intense.
Also, like,
It's
shout out
out
to this person's neighbors for being cool.
It's not. It's out for everybody to see. It's
yeah.
not like hidden intense.
It was like a little mini. Oh my God, it's like a little mini horror night situation.
Oh yeah.
They had all different sections with their own themes.
Yeah, there was like a pirate themed.
There was
clown themed.
There was
like
one
zombies.
that was like a cannibal butcher's tent
Yeah.
theme. That was pretty gnarly.
That was in a tent.
Honestly, that was like, like I'm saying about the neighbors, like that was one of those things that I feel like if you had shitty neighbors, you really couldn't get away with.
There was this enormous spider on the roof of their garage.
Yeah.
That had
Super big.
a human-sized body that was wrapped in spider web, hanging from its
a lot
mouth.
Of tender, loving creepiness went into this.
I guess it's super notorious.
It
and
should be.
It's pretty incredible during the day.
Well
so
done
Can't wait to see it at night.
To anyone that puts that much effort into their Halloween decorations, I doff my cap to thee. I mean, I just fucking love it. It's so awesome. And, there's a sort of like joyous glee to being an adult and doing these admittedly childish things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's enjoyable for everyone that likes this stuff.
And it's an ancient way to stave off the, darkness by confronting it.
What are we talking about today?
I thought today we could start off Spooky Month with witches.
A special Octerrorfest episode, Witches.
Witches.
Awesome. So let's hear it. What do you got?
So today's episode will be segues. So witches, obviously, it's pretty synonymous with Halloween, with October. It's a universal symbol of the season. The silhouette of the pointy hat on a broom, and all of that. But for me, witches, it's always been a little bit complicated.
Well, witches in horror, which is what this episode is going to focus on, has roots in real witchcraft and practices of people from history, both positive and negative, and persecution and execution of said witches.
Yeah, I figure we could talk a little bit about actual witches and a little bit of the history of it and the difference in interpretation, how they've been portrayed in, popular culture.
And also the different types of witches that exist,
Yeah.
both in horror and out of horror.
And of course, we'll talk about like our favorite movies with witches in them.
Absolutely.
About witches.
Or
With
books
witches,
and
Books.
TV shows, and also a video game I'm going to mention that
Oh,
I
for
just
real?
played. Yeah.
That's cool. I didn't know that. Look at that. So what we think of in like pop culture as witches it has sort of a nebulous origin, but it's, pretty much understood that the concept of witchcraft just has a pretty simple beginning of, the person in the village that knew which plants to pick to heal stuff.
Yeah, healers, wise people.
Yeah. Knowledge passed down generation to generation.
A lot of time they were spent for like remedies to illnesses, crops.
Yeah.
For good weather.
And, this was just trial and error over generations of living, with the earth. So, the knowledge is passed down, and for survival, people get put into specialized roles. So villages have a healer. They've got a medicine man, a witch doctor, a shaman, whatever. There are different names for it all over. It doesn't really become negative until later on. Now, I mean, I think, we can see this nowadays. Whenever something goes wrong, whenever something goes well with a healer, you praise them and you call them heroes. And then whenever something goes wrong, it's you killed so-and-so and they get blamed. And that did happen. The person that saves the village is also the person that gets blamed if the village doesn't get saved.
Yeah, I think some of the early healers and some of the, I guess, spells, so to speak, were also used to stave off evil, which essentially became used against the practitioners
when you
of this.
In a society that practices animism and everything, that everything has a spirit, everything has an energy. So part of quote unquote medicine is also addressing the malady of the spirit. So you're using the plants and unguents and whatnot that you get from the land, but you're also chanting and burning incense or something so you can stave off the other half of the disease, which is the evil spirit that's hanging over your home or whatever. But conversely, if some malady strikes the village and all their cattle dies or something, they might go to the woman that knows how to brew stuff that kills cattle.
Right. Well, in the 16th century, Christians were the ones that decided to persecute.
Actually,
and execute.
It was a little bit earlier than that.
Oh.
And that's, I mean, shit, that was a great segue, by the way.
You're welcome.
Yeah, you like, that wasn't planned. So it really, there's always a bit of persecution, but the persecution becomes systematic and like organized and on a mass level in the 15th century with the publication of the book Malleus Maleficarum, which is Latin for Hammer of Witches. And honestly, both the Latin and the English translation, that's a pretty badass title for a book. It sounds awesome.
No band has ever named their album that.
I'm almost certain that there are plenty of like albums and bands named variations of Malleus Maleficarum. I think it's like a Warhammer thing too. I mean, this shows up in pop culture all over the place. This is the book of witchcraft, of witch hunting specifically. How to identify witches, what are witches, the mark of the devil, shit like that. This is the book that equates the practices of witchcraft with the highest crime of heresy. At this time,
that's where the Christian connection starts to come into play.
The Catholic Church at this time runs the show pretty much everywhere in Europe. They are intertwined with the monarchies of Europe. This is the era of kings asking the Pope for permission to do things. So this book is written by a German Catholic clergyman named Heinrich Kramer, just some random pervert in the 15th century. Writes this fictitious book of demonology and how witches do their thing and make covenants with the devil and, blah, blah, blah. But the most important thing that it does is like I said, it makes all forms of this a crime, but not just a crime, the cardinal sin of heresy. And for heresy, there is but one solution and one punishment, and that is torture, confession, and death.
Yes.
So, the other thing that happens is this is around the same time that Johannes Gutenberg invented the printing press. So Malleus Maleficarum is one of the earliest mass-produced books. So this book gets everywhere.
Yeah.
And it gets in the hands of all sorts of creeps and assholes. And that's when real, like, the witch trials and witch hunting really kicks off in the 15 and 1600s.
Yeah, the 16th and 17th centuries, that's when persecution and execution of witches was at its peak. And
the last witch to be executed in Britain was Janet Horne, who was burned to death in 1727. Not that long ago. But if you think about people being murdered in the name of religion or religious persecution, or honestly, modern day tales of exorcisms gone wrong and someone dying, seems like witches are still being executed.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, witchcraft has always been linked to like marginalized and misunderstood strangers
Absolutely.
in communities, or
it's
unique,
a definite catch-all for
Yeah.
like what makes people uncomfortable. And it's unfortunate that, you know, you can still see elements of it. Like satanic panic is absolutely a modern version of witchcraft persecution.
Absolutely.
You know, that was pretty heavy. I think before we get into the Salem witch trials, we should lighten it up for a second.
Okay.
I have a story. So we all know like the icon of the Halloween witch. It's the pointy hat.
Wizard of Oz too.
Wizard
I
of
think
Oz.
is one of
Basically,
the pinnacle.
it's Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the idea of witches riding
Because
brooms.
there's many witches in the Wizard of Oz, not just the bad witch.
True. We're talking the Wicked Witch.
And was she really the bad witch or misunderstood?
Oh, now you're
Because
getting into Wicked. Yeah. Do you want to sing?
No.
Because I
No, thank you.
love to hear.
There's only one song I want to sing, and it's a song that you don't want to hear.
I don't. So
Burning up.
now
It does
most
start out with
popularized-
burning up, so it
definitely
is like
most popularized by Wizard of Oz. You're right, Margaret Hamilton. But the trope of witches riding brooms actually comes back from the 14th century. Now, in the 14th century, there were many written accounts by physicians and scribes and whatnot of a dancing madness of villagers wandering through the street, babbling, giggling, dancing, taking their clothes off, hallucinating, essentially tripping, because that's exactly what they were doing. Around this time, witches, or, you know, medicine women of Europe, were discovering a fungus called ergo. Now, you might recognize that because it is the primary ingredient of LSD. Now, LSD was synthesized in 1943 by the Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann on Bicycle Day, April 19th. So, but at this time, people were just ingesting the ergo. The problem is when you ate it, it was very unpleasant. Could cause rashes, diarrhea, vomiting. It was just not a great way to ingest it. So the learned women of the time discovered you could get all the fun parts of ergo trips with a salve. The best way to get a salve in the body was through a porous region, a mucous membrane perhaps, and a great way to apply salve to said part of
It's
the
gotta
body
be sex.
was a broom handle.
Well, I mean,
Yes. See, I mean, you're in the right direction.
Yeah, wow.
So ergo salves, also known as a witch's brew, were rubbed onto a broom handle, and then you drop trowel and ride the broom.
wow.
And that way you could trip nuts, join Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds without all the unpleasant side effects of eating ergo. So this
it's
was
not
how
so much of a riding a broom as it is a penetration of a broom.
Yeah. Exactly. Although I think that was a little hard to put on film for Wizard of Oz.
Well, she rode a bike.
She did. Now, so this was how peasants got their rocks off back in the 1300s, riding brooms. But as psychonauts are likely familiar, psychedelic experiences can often bring about hallucinations of a religious nature. So that's where you get the idea of demons, because if all anyone's talking about at the time is the Catholic Church coming into your village, telling stories of the devil and demons and the woods and the evil lurking beyond your village, when you take a bunch of acid, you're going to think about those stories you just heard about demons, and you're going to see demons. So at this time, people are tripping, seeing demons, and it's causing mass hysteria. And ironically and tragically, I did say this was going to be light, sorry. This is one of the things that leads to witches being persecuted, is they're making stuff that makes people go bananas. So next time you see old Margaret Hamilton cackling away on her broom, just remember she is not wearing panties, and she is tripping her nuts off. It really does explain why she put little fezzes on the flying monkeys.
Yeah, right.
Because they have little tiny hats on, and that's something that only seems like a good idea when you're on acid.
Well, I mean, the Salem witch trials really started after, sort of a witch craze came from Europe.
It actually, in 1692 is when the Salem witch trials started, and it was, although witch hunting had not yet been made illegal, the execution and persecution of witches had largely wound down at that point. But
it was really about the American colonies of New England, New York, Nova Scotia, and Quebec.
Remember, these were folks deemed too extremely religious to remain in, Calvinist Europe. So, do you want to talk about the Salem witch trials a little bit?
Sure. Yeah.
Do it.
Okay.
Expelliarmus, miss.
So basically, the first sort of Salem witch trial, witch situation, was like the villagers started to have problems with people's devil worship or work with the devil as they perceive it.
I mean, it starts off with things just going wrong.
Right.
Like natural, regular things, disease or, a bad harvest.
Yeah. Reverend Paris's daughter, Elizabeth, at age 9, and niece of Abigail Williams, age 11, started having fits. And so that was sort of the first inclination that something was amiss in the town. And then 3 women were brought before the local magistrates and interrogated for several days starting in March of 1692, and they claimed innocence, but that did not matter. All 3 women were put in jail, and then the seed of paranoia started to permeate throughout the town.
Yeah, people started accusing their neighbors.
Everybody. Yeah. People started getting accused as they were healers, or they may have known things about their own children.
Or had a first grade education. Could read.
Right, yeah. Had an opinion of their own.
Yeah. Didn't say amen loud enough that one time. I mean, it got ridiculous. And it also became a vehicle for, petty jealousies, revenge, people claiming that their neighbors were convening with the devil because they wanted their land, or they just didn't like each other. So
they essentially rounded up all of these women and dozens of them and brought them to Salem.
Over 30 people were arrested. Yeah.
Brought them to Salem and other Massachusetts villages for questioning. And the governor...
Not easy questioning.
No. The governor at the time, William Phillips, ordered a special court to hear and decide for basically where we are right now, the North Shore of Massachusetts. The first case was against Bridget Bishop, and she was known for gossiping and promiscuity.
Oh, I mean, that's witchy stuff.
When asked if she committed witchcraft, she said, "I am as innocent as a child unborn." and it must not have been convincing because she was found guilty and became the first person hanged on what was later called Gallows Hill.
Yikes.
So a few days after this happened, Cotton Mather wrote a letter asking the court not to allow spectral evidence, so testimonies about dreams and visions.
Yeah, bullshit.
And they ignored it.
Yes, they did. Yes.
And then 5 people were sentenced and hanged, like immediately after.
Yeah, that's the thing. We should remind people this was an instance of mass hysteria, but it's not as if every person of any faith was for this. There were people, as there are now in instances of religious fervor and hysteria, there are people within that religion who protest, who are saying, no, this is a perversion of our beliefs. This is not right. God is not telling you to do this.
It did some good, though, because Cotton Mather and his son kept pushing, and the governor eventually released many of the accused witches, dissolved the court, and said that they weren't going to arrest anyone further.
All it took was the state-sanctioned murder of 19 innocent women and girls.
And one man. And then he replaced that original court with a superior court.
Yeah.
Which disavowed spectral evidence and only condemned 3 out of 56 people.
That's how you get things done in America. You round up a bunch of women and execute them, and then you get a law that says you can't use dreams in court. Yay, progress. I want to talk for a second. Listen, I want to talk about Giles Corey for a second.
Okay.
There was one man who was executed. He was executed. He was an elderly man. He refused to testify against his wife, Martha, and he himself was also accused of witchcraft as a result of... So Giles Corey was executed via torture by pressing. What that meant is they laid him flat, put wood on him, like plank of wood, and on top of the wood, they would put stones. And over the course of 3 fucking days, 72 hours, they kept putting stones on this man and asking him to confess his witchcraft and confess that his wife convened with the devil. He refused. Giles Corey's last words, the last time they asked him to confess, he whispered, "More weight." They complied. He died. And
his wife flied
3 days
away
later
on her broomstick.
3 days later, Martha was hung. Now, this death, first off, he is the only person in the United States to be killed in this manner, at least by the state official pressing. So the severity of this was one of the things that brought national attention to the Salem witch trials and brought an end and some reform to the court system, as you mentioned. But it also started the curse of Giles Corey. And because Giles Corey was arrested by the sheriff, now after the death of Giles and Martha, the sheriff of the time kept harassing the children of Giles Corey and trying to seize their property and take their shit because, the people in authority knew what this was all really about. It was about greed and taking stuff. It wasn't about the devil. That was just an excuse. So the curse of Giles Corey affected the sheriff's department because this man died of a blood disorder. And then for years, sheriffs were dying of heart attacks and blood diseases. And it wasn't lifted until 1991 when they moved the sheriff's office out of the town of Salem and announced officially that the curse was broken. So, I don't know. I feel like a lot of cops get heart attacks. It's a stressful job, and they're not known for, healthy diets. But the ghost of Giles Corey has also been seen many times in Salem, famously in the 1914 Great Salem Fire, which destroyed basically all of Salem, 13,000 buildings.
Wow. Left
20,000 people homeless, and many of them said they could see the ghost of Giles Corey, and yet he was happy. So, Giles Corey's gotten his revenge over the years.
Well, it's interesting because when we talk later about some of the emergence of witchcraft and witches in movies, there are different types, and some are out for revenge.
Now, this
some
is
are not.
The Salem witch trials is exactly where my difficulty with representation of witches comes from, because on the one hand, it's fun. It's fun dressing up, and the tropes and the cliches. They're entertaining. On the other hand, it's based on some very real trauma and horrific events, dark moments in human behavior, and things that we haven't exactly moved past. So I don't know. I think it's okay to enjoy things as long as you keep in mind that, what the history is.
Well, I think with an obsession or an interest, it can unearth new information. So, for example, in the 20th century, a lot of artists and science became really focused on the Salem witch trials. Arthur Miller wrote The Crucible.
Yes.
And he used it as an allegory for McCarthyism paranoia in the 50s.
Yes.
And so...
And boy, does it fit.
Yeah. And additionally, other theories have come to light about the strange behavior in Salem back in 1692.
Oh God, how scary that is, that all of the sudden, basically, your whole town goes bananas and starts rounding people up.
Yeah. Well, a scientist in 1976 published a study. She was a psychologist, Linda Capriel. She found out that the abnormal habits of the accused can be directly from the fungus ergo. So Linda blamed these abnormal behaviors on this fungus ergo, which can be found in rye, wheat, and cereal.
And broom handles. And
so toxicologists say that eating ergo contaminated foods can lead to muscle spasms, vomiting, delusions, and hallucinations. It also thrives in warm and damp climates, not too unlike the swampy meadows in Salem Village, where rye was the staple grain during the spring and summer months, which is also why the trials and the persecution and these behaviors started in April through May, and these people were hung in June and July of 1692.
Yeah, that's another thing to remember, is this happened very quickly.
Yes.
Over a very short amount of time. You're just living your life, eking out a meager existence, in the harsh environment, and all of a sudden, everyone goes fucking bananas. And at the end of it, 20 people are dead. What the hell?
So
I mean, it's wild.
Through obsession and interest in the Salem witch trials began a movement of finding the truth to what really led to this behavior. And art became part of this. In the 20th century, a more positive approach to witchcraft emerged with the Wiccan movement in the U.S. and the UK.
I like the co-opting or just the integration with feminism.
Right. It spread because of, feminist interest in Wiccan and the goddess consciousness movements.
Because, in history, at times these women were women of authority.
Yeah.
They were women who had agency, had power, they had unique positions, even in not necessarily a matriarchal society, even in a patriarchal society, these women held positions that elevated them. So, taking that back has been such a fascinating aspect of I don't know, whatever wave of feminism we're in now, fourth wave, third wave. But it's been really, it's led to some really great storytelling, and it's sort of helping us to be able to enjoy these stories by taking them back, by taking them away from their tragic beginnings, and showing, I don't know, a little bit more empowerment. And with that, I think...
Let's take a break, and then when we come back, I'll talk about the types of witches in contemporary society.
And we can get into some of our favorite ones. Then we can get into the horror. All right.
Looking to add a bit more fright to your neighborhood trick-or-treating? Tired of those pesky neighbors with their obnoxious kids? Well, be the pioneer of your town's Halloween nightmares and head down to Helen's Halloween Candy Shop, where you can get all the noxious, poisonous, and downright criminal candy out there. Putting the trick back into trick or treats, Helen's Halloween Candy provides only the best chocolate delights, filled with your choice of razor blades, rusty nails, or thumbtacks. Looking for something less obvious? Try our line of cyanide-laced sour gummies and pixie sticks, sure to get those kids frothing. At Helen's, we even have ant-poisoned dog biscuits, so even the family dog can get in on the action. Whatever your sick desire, we have a treat for you. With our discreet customer transactions, you can be assured full anonymity. So come on down today, where every day is Halloween. This is a fake ad for a fake product on a horror-themed podcast. We do not condone nor endorse trying to poison or murder children. Welcome back.
Hey!
So I'm just going to jump right in with some types of witchcraft and witches out there in the world.
Let me just get off my broom. Hold on. Woo! The walls are melting.
For you, those of you that might be interested, there are witch influencers on Instagram, and there's also Witch Talk, which is like a TikTok division,
Baba Yaga,
specific to witches. So there are some different types of witches in
y'all.
witchcraft.
Just posting here from my chicken foot claw house deep in the woods.
I think some people will find that they have some witchcraft or witch interests in their daily life and the things that they're interested in.
Absolutely. I love the just the integration of old religion, old pagan symbolism, you know, like the world tree, the Celtic knots, things like that. I mean, it's beautiful to look at.
Well, you can be a coven-based witch or a solitary witch.
Ooh, are we getting into kinds of witches?
Types of witches.
Like this.
So the coven-based witch operates as part of a wider group of witches, sometimes led by a high priestess, so that their magical powers together and skills can become stronger.
Nice.
And often involves ritual or ceremony, as opposed to a solitary witch who is just like it sounds, works alone and can follow any branch of witchcraft. So I'm not going to talk about all the different branches and subdivisions of witchcraft and things like that, because there are many.
Because it is forbidden.
But I did want to sort of tell you a little bit of like how some witches identify. So there's hereditary witches, which it's passed down from a familial line.
Also is a movie with witches in it.
Right. A crystal witch, which again, this is what I'm talking
Whoa.
about. A lot of people may be identifying as this. Energy healers,
Oh.
people who use stones and crystals to heal.
For a second, I honestly, when you said crystal witch, I was picturing someone made of crystal, like a crystallized person with
I
that,
bet you
like that was their power.
They would love that. So
That's
they
pretty
were
cool.
connected with stones,
Like Emma
crystals,
Frost?
and gems, and the power that they possess, and they can see energies, auras, and then they can also manifest those energies to help people manifest, improvement in their daily lives.
I could use the services.
So a lot of people, like spiritual workers, spiritual healers, those are all considered types of witches under this, sort of like umbrella of practice, spiritual practice.
Or like every third storefront in Sedona.
Well, cosmic witches are astrology and
cool.
astronomy.
That's a cool
Birth
name.
charts, star signs. They practice active witchcraft to change energies by using their knowledge of star
I wanna
alignment.
Be a cosmic witch.
Well, gray witches. So
now I
witches
wanna
are
be a
the
gray
one
witch.
type of witches that straddle the line between black magic and white magic, and they have no problem going there. So curses, hexes, they'll go to the dark side when they need that assistance or when somebody's soliciting that from them.
Yeah.
So they're not really, their intention isn't necessarily to always heal.
Little more morally fluid in that aspect. Although the study of poison often leads to cures.
Yeah.
The things that are taken in a small dose can be medicinal, but taken in a large dose can be toxic.
There's also a green witch, which uses nature to draw power and healing.
Oh, now we're getting into like Final Fantasy shit.
Those healers, using medicinal tinctures and things like that. If you think of Claire from Outlander, she's also been accused of being a witch.
Claire.
Yeah, she Sassenach. She uses all kinds of herbs and nature to heal. And then there are, a group. Basically, there's a witch for every room in your house. There's a house witch, kitchen witch, hearth witch.
That I feel like that would
sex
get crowded.
witch.
Whoa.
There's a sea witch, which these are all. I think you could figure it out. It's like using the ocean and the energy and powers of the ocean to.
I thought that was a
heal.
sand witch. I'm so sorry.
So there's a lot of different types of witches out there. I just wanted to give you a quick overview.
Can we get back to the house full of witches? Do you have a witch in each room?
No, there's a witch.
Like, can I stock my house with witches?
No, but a house witch is focused on like the health and like wellness of the home and creating like a positive spiritual environment.
But like, let's say I'm some like rich guy, which I totally am, and I want ultimate maximum protection for my luxury properties. Can I just pop a witch into each room? Like, this is man cave witch.
No.
This is garage witch.
It's more like practices of these witches. So when you burn sage throughout your house.
I hope I'm not. Am I being offensive?
No, I
don't mean to be. I'm just an idiot.
Yeah, you are. So it's more about like burning sage, or when you open your doors.
I love that, by the way.
On New Year's, and you sweep.
Yes, like the Italians. That's what we did every year.
Yeah. This is like something a house witch would come into your home and perform for you.
That's so funny because the way I grew up, with multi-generationally with my great-grandparents, my grandparents, my parents, my brother and I, and they were very Catholic and very Italian, and there was a point at which those two things that Catholicism and superstition from the old country sort of like bled together a little bit. Is Catholics aren't really supposed to believe in ghosts and stuff like that, but my family sure did. And there were practices and old things that sort of straddled the line that you could tell existed a long time before the Catholic Church came along and said, "Oh, no, we invented that. Yes, that's ours now." So it was always cool. It's like mostly with the older members of the family, obviously, but yeah.
But I think that it's really important, as we're now in the 21st century, that the idea of witchcraft isn't something to persecute or to be afraid of or ashamed of. That, charging your crystals in the moonlight because it gives you comfort and energy is something that you can accept.
I can think of worse habits.
When you go to a palm reader or somebody who's going to tell you, what they see in your tarot cards, that is, a cosmic witch, somebody who's approaching healing and understanding through the use of star charts or, talisman or what have you.
Now more than ever, it's vitally important that every single person on this planet becomes more connected to the earth. And I think
it's finding comfort, getting answers to questions you may have, whether, they're accurate or not. If they give you comfort and help you feel more grounded, I think it's amazing.
Counterpoint, it can also be going out in the devil's woods and, doing the old horizontal broom ride with him and getting some super duper hex powers. That's what I think.
Well, I think as we go into the fictional world,
that's where I'm
horror
headed. That's where
and
I'm
witches.
headed. Yeah,
that's where we're going to explore. Some of the more outlandish, darker, and more bone chilling.
I feel like
ideas.
Everything that we've talked about so far is important, but was a super duper bummer. And now I just want to get into the fun shit.
Yeah,
made up shit.
Yeah, hexen.
No one got killed doing this.
That we know of.
Yeah.
Hexen, Witchcraft Through the Ages, is the first film recorded about witches, which was released in 1922 and directed by Benjamin Christensen.
You thief.
It was an attempt to understand witches, and the main focus was to explain the mental and psychological ailments of the time. It was seen as more of a documentary with the intention of education and correcting misinformation.
It's hilarious that you're bringing this up because I was also going to bring up Hexen. And I even looked up how to pronounce it correctly, too, because it's not spelled that way. It's Haxan with an umlaut over the A because it's a Danish movie.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my God.
It's a silent film.
It is a silent film. Benjamin Christensen, 1922. You said that already, and I apologize.
It's okay.
So, yeah, Hexen, it's not only is I think you mentioned it's the first movie about witchcraft, but it's also
first recorded film about witches.
It's also, as far as I know, the first fake documentary. It's a mockumentary.
Yeah.
It's done in parts. The way that it's cut together, it's done in like, part 1, part 2, part 3. It starts off with like a sort of pedantic lecture almost on the history of witchcraft. And then in part 2, it goes into this really cool sort of like vaudeville reenactment of the devil. And it has like puppetry. And then the director himself plays the devil dressed up in this like unitard. And he's that sort of like horny, tongue-wagging, like fuck monster devil, and it's bananas, and it's all about like satyrs and orgies in the woods. It's quite something. Then the later parts go into a bunch of old crones mixing up potions in their house, and then it goes to an old woman who's wrongfully accused. And the way the film ends, like you said, Christensen's last part of the movie, he really goes into here's what witchcraft probably was, which is a mixture of mental illness and drug use.
Yeah.
That we just didn't understand. But one of the cool things that Christensen does in this is way before color film, but there still exists separate color filters. So some of the film is in black and white, and then some of the parts he's using just the red filter, so it's all in a red tint.
Wow.
And then some of the movie he uses just the blue filter, so it's all in a blue filter. And essentially what color film is just mixing red, blue, green together, the RBG, and you get colorized film. I mean, it's a little bit more complicated, but that's the earliest colorized film was just overlaying those filters to each other. But Christensen used them one at a time, so you get a whole part that's like blood red, and it was very effective. It's an old movie for sure. It's really worth a watch. It's not scary. It's visually striking, and it's very interesting. And at the time, it was very controversial.
Well, it sounds controversial and shocking.
It was deemed perverse, unfit for public consumption. People were going crazy that it would lead to public acts of Satan worship. That it would, basically people did what they do now, what they've always done when a piece of art that comes out that challenges them.
Oh my God, there's going to be a black
Think of the
Little
children.
Mermaid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that's Hexen.
Yeah. So
it's really worth a watch. It's very cool.
So as we've emerged into, the representation of witches on film, we get to the 60s. And that's really the next big time period
Groovy
in
witches.
Cinema and horror with regard to the depiction of witches. So Rosemary's Baby.
There's definitely a change at that time.
Yeah. Absolutely. Rosemary's Baby played with the concept. Her husband makes a pact with the devil, as we all know.
Famous director John Cassavetes played her husband.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the whole bargain is she'll give birth to the spawn of Satan.
Yeah, I mean, so a husband of the year, John Cassavetes.
You can fuck my wife.
Yeah, it says devil can rape my wife if I get this theater part that I want.
Yeah, that's really
That's it.
So, it also
stars.
unveils the bigger picture of Rosemary's Baby is this psychological trauma that the secret society of witches who are hiding in plain sight and they're pulling the strings of everything. they're the ones that are in charge. Like, it's sort of New York City. Things are happening. It's this darkness and this secret society of witches that is making all of these moves happen. That's what's happening. They're doing it. They're giving all of these favors to people coming to them. And
we're, of course, talking about the neighbors.
Oh, yes, the neighbors.
The Castevets.
Mm-hmm.
Is it Castevets? Was that the name?
I think so.
It was Roman and Minnie.
Yep.
I definitely recognize Minnie because that was played by Ruth Gordon, who later...
Love Ruth Gordon.
Oh, Ruth Gordon's amazing. Later on, about 10 years later or so, would very famously play Maude in Harold and Maude.
Yes.
But yeah, so the neighbors are part of a devil-worshipping witch coven who are pulling all the strings, manipulating poor Mia Farrow as she gestates the Antichrist, giving her weird teas to drink and
with
sending
the best haircut transition any
Mia
actress.
Farrow's pixie cut in that movie is, I mean, it's a generational icon.
Yes.
It's the best.
Multi-generational.
Yeah. She
Still
is,
to this day.
She looks amazing in that movie.
It's incredible.
What if you turned to his eyes? Ah. But yeah, that's the idea of
the Woodhouses.
Witches working behind the scenes to get you into a malleable state. What they're doing is they're keeping Rosemary, they're feeding her this tea and this stuff to like get her body ready. Mm-hmm. They're manipulating her psychologically and cutting her off from her doctor. They replace her doctor. They keep her off balance. They keep her alone and isolated so that when it finally happens, it's way too late for her. She makes a very interesting decision at the end of the movie, but you kind of have to think, did she have a choice?
Yeah. I mean, and she's also thinking that she's alone in this. They've isolated her so much that she only has one option, which is to give in to what's happening.
Well, what Rosemary's Baby...
she has no solace.
Rosemary's Baby shows the witch next door, the one that looks like a normal person. Roman and Minnie just look like an eccentric old couple. At one point, Rosemary notices that Roman has pierced ears, which for an older gentleman in the 1960s was very strange. Mm-hmm. It's not so weird now, but he had his ears pierced because it was part of his satanic wardrobe. But it's the idea that they can be right next to you. They can be your friend. They can act like everything is fine. You can suspect nothing. And the next thing you know, you're doing something horrible,
right?
That they have led you to.
And it is a dark spin on witchcraft.
Yeah, that they have power over you and you're a pawn,
yes.
Which I think a lot of people are very afraid of being manipulated.
And then we sort of move into the revenge element of witches as we emerge with Black Sunday.
Oh, God.
About a witch returning to exact vengeance on descendants who wronged her. Boy, Mario Bava.
Does she? Yes.
Was the director.
Mario Bava.
And
the godfather
Mario
of
Bava,
Italian horror cinema.
Witches were also vampires in that movie, sucking blood.
Yes. So 1960s Black Sunday, it was Mario Bava's explosion onto the scene. He would later go on to do Bay of Blood and Shock. He would partner with Lucio Fulci and Dario Argento. He directed parts of Inferno when Dario Argento got very, very ill, I think, with like tuberculosis or something terrible like that. Dario Argento got really sick when he was filming Inferno, and Mario Bava stepped in to ghost direct it. But anyway.
Bet you it was a witch spell.
So that sounds very Rosemary's Baby, yeah. So 1960, Black Sunday, in Italian known as La Maschera del Demonio, which is the mask of the devil. And the reason it's called that is because very famously, so Barbara Steele, who was like an OG scream queen back in the day, she is a strikingly beautiful woman with kind of like Faye Dunaway style cheekbones.
Nice.
Yeah, so she really cuts an image, and she plays two roles in this movie. She plays the witch from medieval times, who is captured, drinking blood and doing all these horrible things, and they put her in an Iron Maiden mask. So it's a bronze mask with spikes coming out. So they put it on her like the Man in the Iron Mask style, and the spikes pierce her head all around.
Ugh,
and it's really,
yikes.
It's 1960, and the movie is black and white, but it was still, it pushed the envelope in terms of violence and sexuality.
But it has sort of, as I mentioned, because it's a revenge element about descendants, it originally takes place of like a vampire witch from Moldova, from, like the 1630s,
Mm-hmm.
that is sentenced to death
It's
for
Asa,
sorcery.
Asa the witch.
Yeah.
They kill her in this horrific manner, and she comes back centuries later to try to take over the body of Katya, her descendant, also played by Barbara Steele. Now, this movie has just these moments in it, like these like tableaus. There's a moment of Barbara Steele on horseback, and it's against like on a hilltop, and it's just so striking. And when she takes the mask off, her face, is punctured all over. So she's got these puncture wounds all over her face, and she had very piercing eyes, and like I said, those cheekbones and sharp features, that she had this stare that I swear to God, there are just some looks that people can give that chill you to the bone. And Black Sunday, it's a great movie stylistically, but it really wins it on Barbara Steele's performance.
Well, she is said to have been cast because Mario Bava saw captivating photos of her in a Life magazine photo shoot.
Wow.
And commented that she had the perfect face for his films.
I mean, he was not wrong. And to his great favor and to our enjoyment, she was also very talented as an actor. She was really, in this film especially, she's so imposing as Asa, this vengeful, evil witch who was executed, but, it was brutal, but it's not like she was an innocent person. But, the avenging generational curse, the sins of your ancestors and all that, and then playing the dual role of Katya, who's an innocent, who just trying to do her thing, and great-great-great-grandma comes back and tries to take over my body. Black Sunday rules.
Apparently, she was very difficult to work with.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. She was described as strange and neurotic, and Mario Bava said that she was half crazed and afraid of Italians.
That's interesting. She's still with us, Barbara Steele.
Yeah, I guess
and a listener. So
yeah, exactly,
Babs,
Barbara. We love you.
We do. We've got nothing but nice things.
We think you're fully crazed.
We think
not
Mario
half crazed.
was
We would never claim that.
Unfair to say that to you.
Next up is Witchfinder General.
Oh shit, yeah. We talked about in our folk episode.
Yeah, exactly. So we probably won't go too deep, but it's
starring Vincent Price.
Revenge of witches through the corruption of social order, where witchfinders could come to town and torture confessions out of people that they believed to be practicing witchcraft.
Based on a real-life motherfucker named Matthew Hopkins, who roamed the countryside with unchecked authority that he literally made up himself. Yeah. It's like this guy wrote a note that said, "I can do what I want, Matthew Hopkins."
Yes.
And that allowed him to travel the countryside for years murdering women. The real brilliance of Witchfinder General is it's very much not a supernatural film. It is about this human monster, and it really is sympathetic towards the women being persecuted from the very start. The casting of Vincent Price was pretty obvious. He more often than not played the villain, but Price plays him like a monster. It's one of his best performances. And, the side story is of the accused woman that Hopkins is his latest target. Her fiance is, pursuing Hopkins and trying to discredit him so he can rescue his fiance. But it's an early example of taking the witch's side in a story, of saying, instead of these being all-powerful women who could put a hex on a town, yet somehow still be easily caught and burned by a bunch of dumbass peasants. Maybe the real story was you guys were crazy and taking all of your aggression out on innocent people. So this is
Exactly.
an early example of finally exploring that avenue, which is the more truthful one.
So as we talked earlier about, the timeline of actual witchcraft, or the belief of witchcraft, as we get into the 70s, we start to see that reclaiming of the power of the witch in 1977 Suspiria, which we've talked about in multiple episodes, but we also have a remake episode, so check that out. But it's a coven of witches who are, part of a ballet academy and are ready to murder anyone that stands in the way of,
Yeah, pretty much.
their power. So that is really where we start to see this reclaiming.
Yeah.
And now, as we go into the 80s and 90s, we see witches coming out of the shadows and becoming, sometimes a violent force against others, a dark force against others, having something really powerful to do and say.
And they're becoming something
and not
other,
hiding anymore.
It's not just a woman with green skin, cackling on a broom. Now we're seeing all different kinds of witches. We're seeing different perspectives on witches.
And there's a lot of, more sexuality and humor to try to undo the stigma around witches and maybe lighten it up a little bit.
Well, actually, speaking of which, that
Which.
all right, I honestly didn't mean that, but
You walked right into that.
Talking a little bit about lightness brings me into one of my favorite movies about witches. This is a movie I saw when it came out as a child, and it both delighted and terrified me. It's Nicholas Roeg's The Witches from 1990, based on the story by Roald Dahl, and it is one of my very favorite kinds of horror, which is that entry-level borderline horror, the one that ostensibly is safe for kids to watch, except it's got a couple of moments in it where you go, oh, that's right on the line. Now, Nicholas Roeg was an incredible director. He did Don't Look Now with Donald Sutherland, an amazing movie. So this movie really, really stuck with me for two reasons. The practical effects, the prosthetics, the makeup, the gooey transformation scenes where they're turning into rats and things like that. It's so just classic witch cauldron kind of shit. It's basically like Hocus Pocus but hardcore.
Right. That was one I was going to mention.
Well, the other reason The Witches, the 1990 version, is so iconic is Angelica Houston. Angelica Houston is a force of nature in everything she does, but in The Witches, she's so wonderful. It's a little similar to her Morticia Addams portrayal in that there's a campy quality to it, but she's so scary in this movie. She's just got that authoritative, scary, mean headmistress kind of vibe that intimidates children. She hates children. She turns them into mice and rats, And Angelica Houston. This movie came out the same year that Roald Dahl passed away, and he was over the moon happy that she was cast, because he had said when they told him they were making this into a movie, he was pretty upset because he quite famously did not like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Yep.
But when they announced Angelica Houston as the lead witch, that was the person he apparently had pictured in his mind when they said they were going to make it in a movie.
Right.
So he died happy. And I have a tiny connection.
Okay.
Where when I was younger, I was very, very fortunate. I briefly met Patricia Neal, who was Roald Dahl's ex-wife. She was quite old. This was only a couple years before she passed. And I was very excited to meet Patricia Neal because I knew Patricia Neal, the actor, from The Day the Earth Stood Still. The first thing she said to me, I stuttered something like, Miss Neal, it's so incredible to meet you, blah, blah, blah. And she said, what? And I repeated myself, louder, and she said, "Oh, hey, you ever heard of Roald Dahl?" And I said, yes, once or twice I've come across the name. And she said, 30 years married. One day, divorce. What a bastard. And walked away. And that was the
amazing.
day I met Patricia Neal. Honestly, could not have possibly gone better. I should mention it was in a church where I met her. So even better.
So my sort of first pop culture experience of like delight with witches was with 1987's The Witches of Eastwick.
Yeah. Also known as that movie everyone's parents like.
Yeah. I mean, listen, it was about Jack Nicholson's character Daryl comes into town, and he essentially finds these women who are, divorcees, or like I think the one's a widow, and
they're like the Real Housewives types.
Yeah, and they're like sexually repressed.
Yeah, and
like they need something, and they basically emerge as witches. They become witches.
It's Cher, Michelle Pfeiffer, and
Susan Sarandon.
Right,
and they're all hot to trot, and especially Michelle Pfeiffer.
I mean, it's 1987, so yeah, my goodness.
And it's originally
those women are gorgeous now.
Yeah. And it's originally, based on John Updike wrote the book.
Yeah. I have never read it. I mostly know The Witches of Eastwick because I was very forbidden from watching it when it came out. My parents watched it. I really wanted to because, they seemed to really enjoy it. And as soon as they were like, no, then instantly I wanted to watch it. And it was one of those things where I saw it years and years later and was like, oh,
yeah.
It's not a bad movie, but I was expecting something that was so forbidden to be a little bit more risque. And
these aren't horror, but the
idea
of a witch.
It's a fun movie. I think Veronica Cartwright's in it too.
Yeah, I mean, Death Becomes Her.
Yeah,
1982, I think.
No, that's later than that. It was 90s. That was with Meryl Streep. Meryl Streep and Bruce Willis was like her.
Yes.
Bruce Willis playing.
It's 1992.
One of the funniest roles of his career is sort of like the bumbling nice guy, like the anti-Bruce Willis.
And Practical Magic, which everybody loves. But
Sandra Bullock, that one?
Sandra Bullock and AMC Queen, Nicole Kidman.
Oh my God.
But more
Somehow,
about the 80s.
Witchcraft feels good in a place like this. Somehow, I like to ride my broom when I'm going to movies.
So again, the witches are starting to become a part of just, society in a way that benefits themselves, which is not typical of what we've learned historically. Hocus Pocus, as we mentioned, but Pumpkinhead, more into horror. Shit.
Pumpkinhead. You would consider that a witch?
Yeah. What's his name?
Lance Henriksen.
Yes, he plays the dad. He goes to the witch.
Right.
And asks her to cast the spell.
I haven't seen that movie in a long time.
Cast the spell to bring up...
Cast a Deadly Spell?
Cast a spell.
Oh, R.I.P. Fred Ward from Cast a Deadly Spell.
Yeah, her name is Haggis.
Is that true?
Yes.
I need to see this movie
Her
again.
name in the movie is
Her
Haggis.
Her fucking name is Haggis.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Boiled Sheep Stomach.
And she is played by Florence Schaffler. She's now passed.
R.I.P. Flo.
But, she conjures that Pumpkinhead.
Right. I just mostly remember Pumpkinhead himself.
Well,
that is the creature design.
But it
was
still
awesome.
was conjured, that's the thing. And then The Craft, obviously, every boy your age.
I was just going to say the movie starring every crush I had in the 90s.
Well, and also then you were super goth at that point.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. So
The Craft was one of those rare movies that came out when I was a teenager when I was like, oh, someone finally made a movie for me to watch.
Skeet Ulrich and Nev Campbell together.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot he was in that one. I just remember, Robin Tunney was so great. She was really big at that time.
Yeah, Rachel True.
Yeah.
And then Fairuza Balk.
Oh, Fairuza Balk. I loved her. She was in the you remember the follow-up movie to Wizard of Oz that was really dark?
Return to Oz.
Yeah. Yeah. I love Fairuza Balk.
She's been in a couple witch movies.
She's been in great
and
stuff.
she was also in Almost Famous.
Yeah.
So those are some of the, this is like what we're having in the 80s and 90s is witch delights.
Yeah.
Delightful witchery.
Well, it seems like we've come back around now in the 2010, 2020s.
You got to pull it back a little bit to 1999
Oh.
with the Blair Witch Project. So that's where...
How did I skip that?
Exactly. So that's where horror was brought back to witchcraft.
Right.
Very occult, seemingly...
Bette Midler is not in this movie.
Right. It's a very occult movie. It's seemingly a realistic plot with ancient witchcraft.
Was Bette Midler the Blair Witch the whole time? Holy shit,
so,
ladies and gentlemen.
From here, that's what you were talking about. Films like The Woods, Drag Me to Hell, Lords of Salem.
Yeah.
They showed violence and witchcraft.
Right.
Like based on relationship with
Getting
the devil.
Back to the,
I'm involved with the devil.
Yeah.
I conjure the devil, and I'm going to enact all this violence and revenge out there.
And listen, I'll level with you. I love a nuanced, layered, philosophical take on empowerment and whatnot. But goddamn, sometimes I just want to watch a movie about communing with the devil and getting a bunch of whack ass powers. Mm-hmm. That is also good.
Yeah.
So after Blair Witch, I feel like that kicked off this sort of era where we've come back around to telling more, I don't know, quote unquote elevated, I know it's a loaded term, stories about witches, though, where you get movies like 2015's The Witch with Anya Taylor-Joy. A movie I've talked about before is 2021's The Medium, which was a Thai production, is excellent. But that is, about shamans in a rural Thai village. There's also Eve's Bayou for a Afrocentric Louisiana take on Vodun and witchcraft, and that was directed by Cassie Lemons from the original Candyman. Hey, Bernadette from Candyman. Yeah, she is an accomplished director and directed Eve's Bayou. That was her debut film.
Amazing.
A recent movie came out in 2020. It was sort of overlooked because of the pandemic, I think, but I thought it was pretty freaking good. Was The Wretched. Mm-hmm. It's a teen-based horror about like shape-shifting witch next door. It's sort of like a little bit like Fright Night of like, I'm convinced that this weird lady is a witch and no one believes me, but I'll tell you, it is surprisingly hardcore and has a banger of an ending. I really enjoyed it. And then back to the fun side, it would be a crime to do an entire episode about witches and not mention the many, many films of Hayao Miyazaki.
Oh, right.
I mean, all of his movies have witches in them. Spirited Away, Howl's Moving Castle, and they're almost always good.
Yes.
He usually depicts witches as old crones, but they are benevolent. Mm-hmm. They're often laughing, they're smiling, and they usually aid the person on their journey in a very strange, quirky, whimsical way.
Which sounds more in line with the actual practice of certain types of witchcraft. Yes,
of being a net benefit to the person, but also probably being a little weird and hard to understand or outside of your frame of reference.
Right.
This person lives in a hut and brews up seemingly magical cures to things, and I shovel shit all day because I'm a peasant, so it's outside my frame of reference. But Miyazaki's animated films really show they've really captured the magic of witchcraft, and also the humanity of it. It's really beautiful. Ponyo is another one, has like a sea goddess in it,
So now we're back to more contemporary horror films like The Witch, Robert Eggers.
Yeah, I mean,
it's a very pastoral take,
but
ancient take.
It's also, that is,
boring
I think,
take.
Oh, please.
I'm sorry.
We're going to fight. We'll throw down right now.
I'm a witch, so
I know I didn't say I was going to win.
Silencio.
But, well, I think what we're seeing now is it's the best of all worlds, because we're getting stories like The Witch, which combine the horrific and the terrifying with the layered, nuance, multi-perspective takes on witchcraft. It's not just good versus evil binary choice, but it's also scary. You can do both.
Yep.
And I mean, like a lot of things horror nowadays, we're in a real golden era of witch movies. Which I want to leave with one last thing. It's a movie that
I have 3 things to make mention of.
My
last. I want to
last
dive into my favorites.
my last mention then, in my mention, is it's a movie I actually have not seen yet. I meant to watch it before this episode. I just did not have the time, but I have heard so many amazing things about it. It just came out this year. It's by director Goran Stolevski. He's a Serbian director. It's his first feature film. It's called You Won't Be Alone. It's starring Numi Rapace. It's been getting a lot of incredible buzz. It looks really great. It's about a witch that kills and then, I guess, like inhabits the life or takes over the life of a person she kills, and does this to like learn about humanity. And so it's the idea that this witch is definitely a monster, but it's not killing out of malice. It's more like the way a human would kill a bug to study it.
Right.
So it's definitely something to be afraid of, but is it inherently evil? Apparently it's just a very beautiful, meditative, interesting, and you know, at times horrifying take on this witch's journey that I gather spans generations. I think they shot it on location in Eastern Europe, and it just looks lovely and you know, terrifying. And Numi Rapace, like Barbara Steele, she has that face with angular features, and she's such a beautiful woman, but is just has her look is,
you can't really typecast her as a certain background, you know, like she could be Romanian, she could be Russian, she could be European, she could be South African, you know.
So yeah, You Won't Be Alone.
So I wanted to recommend a few things that if you were interested in checking out some contemporary horror on witches, a TV show I can recommend that's fun.
Let me just get my Etch-a-Sketch.
Is The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina.
Oh, shit.
So it's like a supernatural horror show that's on Netflix. It's based on the Archie comic book series of the same name.
Which, just pause for a moment. That's wild.
Yeah, I know. It's very dark. It's like their dark cousin.
Well, for those of you not in the know, about 10 years ago or so, they sort of relaunched the Archie Comics line with some real notable comic book writers and did a dark kind of horror spin on it. There was a comic, I think, called Archie Goes to Hell or something, and that reinvigorated the brand.
It sort of spawned Riverdale.
It did. It absolutely is what Riverdale was inspired by, is this new sort of postmodern take on Archie.
And so The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina was seen as a companion to Riverdale. And so it's on Netflix. It stars Kiernan Shipka from Mad Men. She's Sabrina. And essentially it's about the fictional town of Greendale. It's a coming-of-age story that includes Sabrina Spellman, who has to reconcile her dual half witch, half mortal nature. And, you know, it's a coming of age. So as she turns 16, she actually starts to become a witch. And for those that that might remember, there was a TV show, a different TV show way back.
This is
starring
not that.
Melissa Joan Hart, called Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
That's my generation.
It's also similarly based.
What was the cat's name?
But not.
Do you remember? Because the cat was my favorite part.
Yeah. Salem. The cat's name was Salem.
Shit. It was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Salem Saberhagen.
Yeah. So you can check that out. The other thing I wanted to mention is a novel by...
But all, like, just on Sabrina, like, don't be put off by that. It's surprisingly hardcore. Like, it's dark.
Yeah, it's very different. It's dark.
It's not
teen
for kids.
Drama.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's sort of like Gossip Girl meets...
Vampire Diaries?
No, because that's Vampire Diaries. Gossip Girl meets witches is Sabrina.
Okay.
Gossip Girl meets vampires is Vampire Diaries.
Dear Diary, today I drank blood. Yum.
So the other thing I wanted to mention is a book called Something Wicked This Way Comes.
Oh, wow.
It's from 1962 and it was written by Ray Bradbury.
The master.
It's about two 13-year-olds. They're best friends, and a traveling circus comes to town, a carnival. And the carnival's leader, Mr. Dark, his name is, he has the power to grant people's secret desires in the town. But the way that he's getting the power is that he basically lives off the life force of people they've enslaved. And the title itself comes from what we didn't mention, the witches in Shakespeare.
Yes, of course. By the pricking of my
Greek
thumbs.
myth. We didn't mention those types of witches.
No, I mean, we got to keep these episodes under like 5 hours.
Yeah, but this title comes from Macbeth. By the pricking of my thumbs.
Something wicked this way comes.
This
Yeah.
way comes.
And just as an aside, the movie version from the 80s with Jonathan Pryce as Mr. Dark is totally worth a watch.
Sure. Yeah.
It's really good.
And then my last recommendation is to check out the video game part of the Dark Pictures anthology called Little Hope.
Right.
And it takes place in a fictional town that it's all supposed to be Salem. So it takes place in modern day, but there are connections to history of this town where they persecuted and executed witches. So there's a young girl who's being accused of witchcraft, and you as the player don't really know, is she a good witch or a bad witch?
And that's one of those, like...
Or is she a witch at all?
It's like an interactive movie, choose your own adventure type thing where you make character choices, and based on what you decide, the action plays out. So,
and the backdrop is witchcraft and Salem, specifically witch trials, and how to trust what you're hearing and how to know, is this, what you should do. What should you do? Should you get on the bandwagon and persecute this girl, or should you try to protect her? And one of the characters befalls the same fate as your husband,
Giles Corey.
Yeah.
That's heavy. Well,
Good
that's
one.
the same video game developers as one of your other recommendations, The Quarry.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, you would like those guys.
I do.
Yeah.
I like the choose your own adventure games.
I mean, witches, it's such an incredible topic.
And there's so much we didn't cover.
Really didn't.
Feel free to check out, some of the recommendations or even the movies that we mentioned here.
You can always come back to it, do another one.
Absolutely. We could.
Yeah.
Which witch is which?
I mean, if we want to do like a vaudeville episode, sure. Or, listen, I'll grease up a couple of broomsticks. We'll leave the thing on record and just see what happens.
Well, join us next week for our next episode in our Octerrorfest. Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our Octerrorfest theme and all other music was written and performed by David Suspanic. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you do, we promise not to haunt you.